charity work, alhamdulillah. He's been very active in the community and also the charity, inshallah. I'm just going to have a brief introduction. I don't want to embarrass the Ustadh, but we still need to kind of establish the work he has been doing, inshallah, and the kind of experience he's got, inshallah. He's a graduate in history, inshallah, a master's in Crusader Studies, inshallah, and also a PhD in Fada'il al-Quds, mashallah. Allah, preserve his work, inshallah. He's also, he's travelled from a long distance, mashallah. He's also going to be travelling back to Nottingham tomorrow, inshallah. So, alhamdulillah, we're honoured to actually have him here, inshallah. Where's Brother Tawhid gone? Alhamdulillah. It's a bit of a last minute. We've got Brother Tawhid here. He's going to be actually reciting a bit of Quran, inshallah. And then from there we'll take it, inshallah. Alright, jazakallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون ولا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم أولئك هم الفاسقون لا يستوي أصحاب النار وأصحاب الجنة هم الفائزون لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم
Okay. الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئة أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It is really beautiful being alhamdulillah in this masjid for my first time in this great community, and I ask Allah preserve and bless all of you for taking time out to come today. So our topic of discussion today I think is a very important one, to discuss about the history of Al-Andalus. Al-Andalus, Spain, in fact, is the largest country in the entirety of Europe. And so if you think of it like this, therefore, that Muslims had a very long-lasting civilization in Al-Andalus in Spain. Their presence was for about 700 to 800 years in the largest country in Europe. We had Khilafah system of Islam running civilization in the largest country in Europe, and we happen to be in Europe. And so therefore, if you think about the context of the whole thing, it looks quite interesting for us. Why did the Muslims have an interest to go to Europe, to Spain, to Al-Andalus? What was so interesting about this space Al-Andalus that made it different to what they were used to in what you might call today the Middle East or the Arab world. In the year 711, a man called Musa ibn Nusayr, who was the governor of Africa, took a young boy, quite young man called Tariq ibn Ziyad, who was around 19, 20 years old, and he was a freed slave, and he made him the general of his army and also appointed him as governor of Tangiers. Tangiers is the northwest, the furthest northwest of what you might call modern day Morocco, Al-Maghrib. And Musa ibn Nusayr and Tariq bin Ziyad, these two important people, was sent, this was part of the Umayyad Khilafah, decision making, to go to Al-Andalus. In all honesty, we don't know exactly the reason why they went there. One thing that Muslim historians write about quite after the event is a popularized story. In this story, you have a person called Julian. Julian is the Count of Quetta. Quetta is the northeast, the furthest northeast of Maghrib, Morocco is Quetta, furthest northwest is the Tangiers. And Tariq bin Ziyad, of course, is the governor of, of Tangiers. And so, what happened, the story goes, that the Count of Quetta, Julian, had a problem with the king of Spain, of Al-Andalus, Spain, called Roderick. And the alleged story goes that the Count Julian of Quetta had a daughter, and the daughter was sent to Spain to study in one of the schools of King Roderick. And when she was there, she was abused. She was abused, mistreated in a bad way. And so out of his sense of vengeance or revenge, he wanted to exact against King Roderick of Spain. He allied with the Muslims, or he assisted the Muslims in arriving into Al-Andalus. This is a very popular story. She herself is popularized as Savaromia. She's named Savaromia. Some Christians have a negative attitude towards her. They see her as like a seductress, a very loose woman. Others, they see her as a victim. Depends which history you're reading. In any case, she figures prominently in that early episode of the arrival of the Muslims. And so in the year 711, Tariq bin Ziyad takes an army. He has about 500 infantry, 500 cavalry, and they cross the Straits of Gibraltar and they arrive into Al-Andalus. Gibraltar, you might know, is named after him. It's Jabal al-Tariq, the Mount of Tariq, which they named Gibraltar, named after him. And so when he arrives, what does he see? What does he see in this new land of Spain? Why are they there? That big army is there. Who's there in Spain? Spain is ruled by the Visigothic people. The Visigothic people are a Gothic tribe, like you have the Ostrogoths and you have the Visigoths. And they were ruling Spain. They were Christians. They were newly converted Catholics just before they became Catholics. Not too far in the history, they were in fact Arians. It's the weather. Alhamdulillah. Arians. So who knows about Arians and Arianism? In the 4th century, you had a Christian priest called Arius. Arius was a priest, and he was present in the Council of Nicaea. Maybe you might know about Council of Nicaea. It's where the Christians debated about the personality, the personage, the nature of Jesus, Isa alayhi salam. And so he was one of the priests who was there, who argued against the doctrine of the Trinity the Catholics believe today. The one upholding that doctrine was a man called Athanasius, priest, and Arius was his rival. He argued against him. He believed, in fact, that Isa alayhi salam was not Allah, was not God, was not a son of a God in a divine sense of the word. And so he was not accepted. He was sent into exile. And so the Spaniards, the Spanish Christians, were Arians. They followed him. Until before the Muslims arrived, they converted to Catholicism. And so if you think, therefore, that means in their history, in their bloodline, or so to speak, their parents, grandparents were Aryans. That's much closer to Islam than Catholicism is, belief in the Trinity, and so on and so forth. And so when the Muslims arrived, these Visigoths, too many of them, embraced Islam, accepted Islam, because they saw the similarity between Aryanism and Islam. They connected to Islam. Others who didn't, they accepted Muslim rule. And others who didn't accept Muslim rule or nor became Muslim, they fled northwards. And this was mostly the Visigothic nobility, the rulers of the land. They didn't accept Muslim rule, nor did they become Muslim. They just fled. They fled north, as far north as they could go. The main one, his name was Pelagio, and he was a leader of these rebels who fled north. And when they fled north, they arrived right to the top of Al-Andalus, a place called Asturias. Two places, Asturias and Galicia. And these are mountains. And so the Muslims, therefore, when they're sending the armies, different districts, Asija and Seville and Granada, Cordoba, all these places, some are accepting, like Toledo falls quite quickly to the Muslims. Cordoba, there was a long siege, they didn't accept very easily. But they didn't go as far as these Visigothic nobility went, right to the top of Asturias and Galicia. They did send some people there. But the point was that the Muslims had a very strong cavalry, very strong horsemen. And the horsemen struggled to go all the way up to the mountains. And this is why they thought, well, it's only a few of them, let them die out by themselves. They can't cause them much damage because we're now ruling the country and we shouldn't trouble ourselves too much. But it was a mistake. And it was a mistake that historians write about in hindsight after the event, because this initial small band of Christians in the Asturias and Galician mountains would grow. They would grow in size, grow in power. Early on, you had a very famous battle in the year 712 called Battle of Covadonga. And so the Muslims, they had different military rulers. The first one was a man called Asamh ibn Malik al-Khawlani. And one of the early ones, I think even the one before him, he sent a small force to fight these Christians in the north. When they went there, there was a surprise attack. So the king Pelagio, they appointed him king, by the way. They appointed him. They had a network, they had leadership. They allied with other Christians who also fled north, didn't accept Muslim rule, and they became, kind of a small power unto themselves. They refused to pay taxes, so no paying the jizya. They were kind of independent, autonomous, small, independent, autonomous rule. And so when the Muslims sent this small, contingent to try and engage with them, there was surprise attack. So they thought that they had left, but they didn't. They came around them. It's a bit like Battle of Uhud, if you think. They came around them and they took their spoils, and then they defeated them and they killed the Muslim ruler also. Now Christians, they depict this Battle of Covadonga as a spark of the Inquisition. They see this as the spark. It was like the seed that was planted in that year 712. And then hundreds and hundreds of years later, you would have the final expulsion of the Muslims in the Inquisition, and that was the spark. They depict that as the first victory of Christianity against Islam in that land. Okay, but in any case, the Muslims, they say it was more like a skirmish. They say it was more like a skirmish. And later on, there was more battles, and they were defeated as well. But the point is, as a presence, they remained in the mountains of Asturias. Now, Muslims, they consolidated power and rule when they first arrived into Al-Andalus. Who else was there? So it was the Christians. There were also Jews. There were Jews living in Spain. How were they treated? They were treated very badly. Very badly. I always see, in fact, as a kind of an irony of time, kind of circumstantial or situational irony, that some of the many similar things that happened to the Muslims in Al-Andalus much later on had already happened to the Jews before the Muslims even arrived into Al-Andalus. It sounds like quite an interesting irony. It's quite true. So before the Muslims arrived, what was happening with the Jews? The Jews were persecuted. The Jews were forced to become Catholics. The Jews were forced to be baptized. The Jews, they had council of Cordoba, for example. Visigothic rulers like Ricard I, Chinthilla, had edicts against the Jews. They would say like, the Jewish children cannot stay with their parents because they would deviate them, so they have to stay with Catholic, foster parents. And so all of these prescriptions against the Jews because of, of control and injustice. And so when the Muslims arrived, they saw this minority of the Jews, and they gave them rights. They gave them rights. The Jews were forced, expelled out of Al-Andalus. The Muslims brought them back inside into Al-Andalus. The Jews were not allowed to have synagogues. The Muslims were allowed to rebuild their synagogues. And the Muslims made a very famous treaty called the Treaty of Theodomir around that time. So by the way, so when Tariq bin Ziyad came in, the next year, 712, July, Musa ibn Nusayr met him with a big contingent of 7,000 people as an army. So they came together, these two, the next year. And so the Jews therefore had a very tough time, but when the Muslims came, it was a really great happiness for them. This is why you have Jewish historians like Zion Zohar says that when the Muslims crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, the Jews welcomed them as liberators from Christian rule. They saw them as saviors, liberators, that they've come to liberate us, and it's quite true, it happened like that, Allahu Akbar. They gave them the justice of Islam, and not to mistreat people or treat people as second-class, third-class citizens. They gave them a sense of presence, And so, now in the Treaty of Theodomir that they made with, this is now with the Visigoths, the Catholics, with Theodomir, they had rules, so in the treaty, it was modeled, by the way, on the treaty of Umar ibn al-Khattab that he made with the Christians of Bayt al-Maqdis. Not to destroy churches was one of them. Not to break crucifixes was another one of them. Not to disrupt them on their national holidays, like on Easter or Christmas time, was one of them. And it was really welcomed by the Christians, because they thought, well, that's actually a great deal for us. They could worship in their own ways, in their own places. But of course, under the rule of Islam, the Jews had their rights, and really seemed quite a good deal for people. Except, of course, for the Christians of the north. But of course, in time, those Christians would grow. And they would grow, and they would grow. Now, a few very important things happened in this time. This is 8th century. So 711, 712. Now we come to the 720s. In the year 721, the Muslim ruler, or you could say the leader of the army, as well as being the ruler, was a man called Samh ibn Malik al-Khawlani. And Samh ibn Malik al-Khawlani, he took his army, and they went to Toulouse, in France. Okay, so they've taken Spain. Now they're pushing further north into France. They get to Toulouse, and in Toulouse they meet an army fighting under Duke Odo of Aquitaine. Okay, again France. So they're loyal to him. They're not his army, but they're loyal to him, fighting under him. And they have a victory. They defeated the army of Duke Odo of Aquitaine. Samh Malik al-Khawlani is celebrated as this great, fighter, general. But Duke Odo of Aquitaine was present in the battle, but then he vanished. He just went away under secrecy. And they thought he had left. He had not left. He had gone to receive help from a man called Charles Martel. And Charles Martel was the like they call him the Prince of the Franks, Charles Martellus, the Prince of the Franks, of the French. But he wasn't interested. So Odo of Aquitaine is telling him that the Muslims are just coming because they've taken the whole of Spain, and they're coming north. They're going to take France also. They're trying to make him feel. He wasn't interested because he thought they're not that powerful. They can't do that, because remember that France was the Christian base. The Pope lived in France. The church was very strong in France. And so, not interested. And so Duke Odo then returns, and when he returns, surprise attack against Samh ibn Malik al-Khawlani, and he's martyred there. He's killed there and he's martyred there. And so that's 721. Now we get to 730. In 730, the new Muslim, governor called Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi, rahimahullah, he takes his army and they go to Aquitaine itself. So the power base of Duke Odo of Aquitaine, he went straight there to Aquitaine itself. And when he gets there, again, there's a defeat of Duke Odo. Duke Odo is not there. They go as far as Bordeaux. This is France. This is like they're going further north, and there's a victory. Now Duke Odo, what does he do? He goes back to the same person that he told him not interested. Goes back to Charles Martelly and he says, "Look, you told me that they're not strong enough, but they've just defeated us all over again in my power base of Aquitaine, so please send us help, reinforcements, do something." So Charles Martel now, he listens carefully and he agrees a date to engage the Muslims in battle in the year 732 in a very famous battle called the Battle of Tours. Tours. Tours is in France. This is mid-France. So what happens in this Battle of Tours? This is the most decisive battle the Muslims will have with the French in France. In Tours. Okay, so what happens? Now, it's winter. It's like October, November time. It's cold in France. And the Muslims, when they go there, Rahman al-Ghafiqi's army, they don't know where Charles Martel has arranged the battle. They don't know the location. Charles Martel had been preparing for the Muslims since 721. Now it's 732. So he's had a long time to look and consider the Muslims. He knows who they are. He knows the way that they fight. He knows the armament that they have. He knows the weapons that they have. And so what he does is he chooses the location of the battle. Okay, it's on a hill. So the Muslims have a very strong cavalry. He has a very strong infantry, men, foot soldiers, And so the horses, of course, would struggle to come uphill, just like the problem we had before with the mountains of Asturias. They would struggle to go uphill. He arranges his army on the top, on the foot of the hill, on the top of the hill, under the cover of trees. So the Muslims, Rahman al-Ghafiqi and his army, they're there, with the horses, they're looking up, and that's where Charles Martel's army is, but under the cover of the trees, so they can't see exactly where they are. It's like a hidden army. Second thing is, when Charles Martel approached the battle scene, he took the small roads, not the big roads, the small roads under cover of darkness, so they couldn't see what route they would take to their battle site. Okay, the second thing. Number three, they were prepared for the winter. So this is, of course, they live there, so they know, of course, their own terrain. Prepared for the winter, they had good clothing, they could last the siege. But the Muslims, they're struggling because they don't have the right clothes, right? They're wearing jubbahs, stuff like that, because they can't. It's very cold. So how do you deal with a situation like that? This is very cold, and 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days, and it's too long. Now they have to make a move. They have to break that deadlock, and so Uthman al-Ghafiqi says, let's just march upwards. And they marched upwards. Now, Charles Martel, he arranges his battle, his army, in what's called a phalanx. Phalanx, P-H-L-A-N-X, phalanx. A phalanx is a Greek military kind of, a battlement. Okay, so what it's made of is made like a rectangular mass, all of infantry. A rectangular mass of infantry. And they didn't have many, cavalry of horsemen, and so the idea is therefore that there's always reinforcements in the phalanx. When the Muslims marched upwards into to get to the top, where they are, the men just marched downwards, and the horses, of course, struggled to come upwards, and so they were really outmaneuvered by the Christians. It was a very decisive victory for Charles Martel. And he was really lauded, by the Christian world as Charles Martellus, Charles the Hammer, they called him. Charles, Prince of the Franks, they called him. And the Christians really made use of this defeat in their chronicles. They depicted it as a defeat against Islam and the Muslims. And that is the furthest point Muslims would ever get in France. Never ever until today they got further than the Battle of Tours, that location. That's been the final point in terms of conquest. So they tried Bordeaux, Aquitaine, and Toulouse, but not further than Tours, and this is 732. Anyway, Muslims, of course, this is now we're dealing with. That's the first thing the Muslims of Al-Andalus did. In the 700s, they're just working on consolidating their rule. They're building their army strong. They have a sequence of governors, and this is one thing again. So in hindsight, historians, they say that might have been a bit of an error because they have a quick succession of governors. So as soon as they capture a place, they appoint a governor. And then within 6, 7 months, 8 months, they appoint a new governor, and a new governor. And it's too many governors. So they can't therefore stabilize their rule because it's just a sequence of quick successions of governors. But they're doing good things. And so the first capital for the Muslims of Al-Andalus was Seville, Ishbilia. Not for long until it moved to Cordoba. Now, if you think about it, Seville is an amazing, beautiful place. It's a really beautiful place. And you can think about why the Muslims chose that as a location for their first capital. It's really, really stunningly beautiful. And remember that Muslims, when they went there, they'd never seen something so beautiful. It's not like they were used to the terrain of the Arab world. Sometimes it's almost recurring, isn't it? Like it looks the same. But when they saw Spain, I mean, it's wow, what on earth is that? It was really stunning. And the weather, Allahu Akbar, the climate, the weather, the trees, the calm, the peace, it was really beautiful. And they fell in love with it. Now here Allah in the Quran gives us something to think about. Allah in the Quran says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إنا جعلنا ما على الأرض زينة لها لنبلوهم أيهم أحسن عملا. We have made on the earth something beautiful, adornment, زينة لها, adornment in the earth. لِنَبْلُوَهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. So we could test which of them are best in action. So if Allah gave them this land, what are they going to do in that land? They could corrupt it, they could ruin it, they could be tyrannical, or they could deal with the people with justice and goodness. And Allah in the Quran says, ثُمَّ جَعْلْنَاكُمْ, Allah says, we made you, after them, خَلَائِفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ مِنْ بَعْدِهِمْ لِنَنْظُرْ كَيْفَ تَعْمَلُونَ. We made you خَلَائِفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ, rulers, successors on the land, so we could see not just ماذا تعملون, what do you do, كيف تعملون, how do you do. This is كيفية العمل. This is the how of action. How do you act? Right? If you say we're going to establish justice, how would you do that? With what principle? With what mercy? With what goodness would you deal with the people? And so in the early period, remember it's hard because we're dealing with 800 years of rule, so we can't, have to be a bit fast. But the point is, it's for the first, let's say, few centuries, Muslims are consolidating their rule. Something big happens. Again, we're still in the 8th century, so 700. So now 732 Battle of Tours. What happens in 750? Something very big happens. In 750, you had the Abbasid revolution, and so the Umayyad Khilafah was based in Damascus. The Abbasids had a revolt. They killed the members of the Umayyad family. The leading members, they just slaughtered, they killed them, all of them, and they took power. Then you had the beginning of the Abbasid Khilafah. But there was one boy, who was 20 years old, 19, 20 years old, who survived. So they were all killed, mother, father, uncles, all killed. This one boy survived. His name was Abdul Rahman. They called him Saqr Quraysh, the falcon of Quraysh. And he fled together with his brother and his son and his two sisters. His brother, his son, his two sisters. They fled. They fled together. And the plan was to follow the Euphrates River. They're fleeing from the Abbasids. Now, Abdul Rahman, he's a Berber, so he has like orangish hair, so easily recognizable. And so the Abbasids sent mercenaries out to try and track him, find him. And the whole plan is just to follow the Euphrates River. It reminds me, in fact, of like Harriet Tubman, you know, the amazing, remarkable woman, Harriet Tubman, you know, who helped in the freeing of so many slaves in America, you know, when they were enslaved by white slave owners, and she had this, and she was a head of the Underground Railway movement in America. Harriet Tubman, a remarkable woman, and the whole plan was follow the Northern Star, because that led to Chicago, a safe zone. Whereas down south in Mississippi, it was a more of a racist area. Reminds you of that. Or even like in Australia, amazing story of those two girls who had to escape following the rabbit-proof fence. These were Aboriginal girls, right? Aboriginal girls, and they were separated from their parents, and they were by themselves taken to like a boarding school where they were bullied and everything else. And their grandmother reminded them that always remember to follow the rabbit-proof fence, and that would lead to home. And these young, two or three young girls, they walked hundreds and hundreds of miles by themselves, following the rabbit-proof fence until they got home. I think one died on the way, you know. But therefore, his idea was follow the Euphrates River, going from Damascus, Palestine, Sinai, until they get to Egypt. But they followed, and so Abdurrahman and his brother once caught up, the mercenaries catch up with them, and so they kind of throw themselves in the Euphrates River, and they try to swim to safety. But his brother couldn't swim too well, and so he swims back to shore. The Abbasid mercenaries are waiting for them, and they kill him, they slaughter him, they decapitate him. And his brother witnessed. Uthman saw that happening. He was supposed to frighten him, but he has no choice except to carry on going, and so he carries on going. Now he has a slave with him, a Berber slave called Badr, slave or ex-slave with him. And so these two go. He leaves his sisters behind in a caravan because they're less likely to be harmed. And they get to Egypt. Now in Egypt, there is a Berber, there's an Abbasid governor, newly appointed, who used to be Umayyad loyalist, but now he's Berber supporter. Sorry, he's an Abbasid supporter, and he sends his mercenaries to try and find these two, Abdurrahman and his servant, and they escape him, and they arrive in the Maghrib, in Morocco, Maghrib, in the year 755. This is 5 years. It took them 5 years since Abbasid revolution to get to, the Maghrib. Now, the great bulk of Muslims in Al-Andalus are Syrians. They were part of the regional army, and so Syrians, that's where the Umayyad Khilafah was. You had the Umayyad dynasty based in Damascus, May Allah help the Muslims of Syria, of Bilad al-Sham. But that's where they were. And so what he does is he sends, his servant, Badr, to go to Damascus and find out, like a reconnaissance mission, will they accept him if he comes into Al-Andalus? Would they accept him? And so he goes there and he says, it's good ground for you because they're waiting for someone like you to lead them. He's only like 25 now. And so when he goes there, crosses, they welcome him and they appoint him, and he becomes the Umayyad ruler. They appoint him as the Umayyad ruler. So now it's a bit odd because you have the Abbasid Khilafah dynasty, you have the birth now of the Umayyad Khilafah, and then you have another one which is the Fatimid Shia. They have their own Khalif. So you have these three kind of power bases at the same time. But he does a beautiful thing, Abdurrahman, because he deals with the people with justice, and they love him because he's from them. He's from them. But the most important ruler was not Abdurrahman, the first Saqr Quraysh. It was in fact Abdurrahman the third. He was the most celebrated Muslim ruler. He was a Khalif as well, appointed Khalif, and he really transformed Al-Andalus. At that time, he really gave it the shape that it had, the face that it had. Abdurrahman III worked with Jewish people as well as Christians. He made, in that time, what came to be known as convivencia, which is the coexistence of Muslim Jews and Christians, together building this amazing civilization. He had a Jewish diplomat called Hasdai ibn Shaprut. He would send him to major centers like Constantinople, Rome, to bring them in and see the splendor of Al-Andalus. What was happening in Al-Andalus? The Muslims, this is Abdurrahman III's great idea, great thinking. Well, one of the first things he did was he reduced the taxes upon the people. Reduced the taxes. And so therefore he dealt with them with a lot of mercy, with a lot of kindness and goodness, and they really began to love him. He sought to do away with divisions, right? So one thing that you had in Al-Andalus is because you had Muslims who settled in different areas, like for example you had Syrians in one area, and then you had the Turks, and then you had the Berbers, and you had different people, different areas, and so over time, resentment would breed, hostility against others would breed, and this is the problem that happened, right? If you're only living amongst your own people, all you'll see is your own people. And you can't connect with other people because you think everything is in this one area. And they began to think like that. And so he did away with that. And he made a new army of about 15,000 Muslims in his army. So rather than having independent rulers think about one single rule, he did that. Cordoba was the capital of Al-Andalus. So Seville for a short time, and then Cordoba was the main city. And Cordoba became known as the City of Lights. Why is it a City of Lights? Cordoba was the first lighted lamped city. 10,000 lamps in the city of Cordoba. Lights, right? So this is street lamps, street lights. Just imagine. Everything else there's nothing like that anywhere in the European world. So Cordoba, you had street lamps, 10,000 of them. In that one city, you had 300 libraries. 300 libraries in one city. 600 masajid. 600 mosques in one city. 50 hospitals in Cordoba. Abdurrahman III, the Khalif, has a personal library of 300,000 books. Imagine. And we have 30, we think, oh, 300,000, 3,000, wow. And he's a Khalif. And this is his personal library, not for public use. 300,000 books. That shows he must be quite clever. He's reading and he's learning. So the idea was putting the emphasis on learning. He sets up makatib for blind students, makatib for disabled students, schools, right? What was the madhab that was in Spain was the Maliki madhab. Maliki, Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi was the Maliki Imam of Al-Andalus. He studied the Muwatta at the feet of Imam Malik himself. Imagine. Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi is a very famous story. He goes all the way from Al-Andalus to Medina to study the Muwatta with Imam Malik. Right? It's a very famous incident. What happened once in Medina, he's studying the hadith with him, and all of a sudden in the class, all of the young boys, they get up and they run out because an elephant had come. Okay, there was an elephant. Okay, and so for them it was an attraction to see an elephant. Except Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi, he remained in his position. So Imam Malik asked him and he says, "Why didn't you go?" I said, "The elephant." He said, I left Al-Andalus. I came all the way from here not to see an elephant. I came to see you. And it's very beautiful. So he came back, therefore he became the main source of reference and knowledge of the Muslims of Al-Andalus, and that was the Maliki method was the predominant one in Al-Andalus. And so if you imagine, for Muslim schools, they made beautiful homes and houses, irrigation. Seville became known as the land of boating and agriculture. From Seville you had Abu al-Khair. Abu al-Khair authored his Kitab al-Falaha, the book of farming. Ibn al-Awwam al-Ishbili, he wrote a book describing more than 568 types of plants. If I said to you, let's name a plant each, I don't think we'll get anywhere. You'll just say the same one as him, and I'll say the same one as you. Imagine 568 types of different plants. You see, in his book. These people were geniuses. I mean, they were scholars in their own fields. Abu al-Khair, the other one. You know, in Seville, Allahu Akbar, you had women, Valada. Valada, she was a Almohad princess, you know, and she was a grammarian. And she worked on manuscript illumination. She was a poetess, Valada. You had so many others like her. You know, you had great people working in those lands, but that was really the main center of voting. In Qurtuba, for example, you had science. You had science, you know, Ibn Zuhr, Ibn Zawar, very celebrated as a master of surgery. Az-Zahrawi, the master of surgery, of science. You had Ibn Sina, again, philosophy, science, the work on ethics, for example. Ibn Rushd, Ibn Zawar, everyone knows Ibn Rushd. These were from Al-Andalus. Imam al-Qurtubi, the Imam of Qurtuba, Al-Qurtubi was from Qurtuba. Great scholars are emerging, scientists, luminaries. Muhammad ibn Fatuh was the man who made the astrolabe. This is Seville, I think, Seville or Qurtuba, in that land. And so all these great personalities, Muslims are emerging, spending time writing. Great scholars pass through. Travelers, Ibn Battuta passed through. You know, at the same time in Baghdad, what's happening is you have the Dar al-Hikmah. Dar al-Hikmah is another place that's a land of wisdom, that's a place of learning. So you had Al-Khawarizmi, where you get algorithms from, isn't it? Algorithms are named after him. In Al-Andalus, also from him is algebra, because of his book, Kitab al-Jabr, isn't it? Well, yeah, the book of... So algebra, therefore, is from him, from Al-Khawarizmi. And they took that. And so what's happening, therefore, is that when the Muslims are creating all these amazing things in the Western world, they don't have anything. No focus on sciences, or not as much as what the Muslims have. And so you have Westerners who are now traveling all the way to Al-Andalus, and they're learning from the Muslims. Famous names like Petrus Alfonsi. Petrus Alfonsi was the one who was a Jew, a Christian who became a Jew who became Christian in 1118, and then he traveled northwards. He went to England. He became the surgeon, I think, for King Henry, and he introduced to the Western world what the Muslims are learning of science, of mathematics, right, of art, and all these things. Petrus Alfonsi. Michael Scott was the one, I think, who translated the astronomical tables of Al-Khawarizmi, right? You had Michael Scott, Adelard of Bath, very famous Adelard of Bath, right? He learned Arabic, translated the works of Muslim scientists into Hebrew, Castilian, Arabic, right? Latin, translated them for the Western people to learn. This is what the Muslims, and then they built on it. And then the Westerners, then they built on it. And they began to investigate more. So the Muslims, therefore, for this period, are really focused on learning and building a civilization. Abdurrahman III builds a new city called Madinatul Zahra. Madinatul Zahra. And he builds this city from scratch in 1 year, an entire new city. And this whole city was therefore to show the Western world. They would bring in these diplomats and dignitaries to see the splendor of Al-Andalus, a new city just for the purpose of pomp. It's quite sad, actually, to be honest with you. It's quite a sad thing, because one thing that you notice happening, therefore, is that although a lot of achievements are being made and a lot of things are happening, there's something you can notice. Of course, you read history in hindsight, and historians reflect back on it, and they say, well, where were things going wrong? Well, at one point, you run the risk of turning the elegance into excess, elegance into extravagance. You know, who's heard of Masjid Qurtuba, the masjid in Qurtuba? At that time, it was the most grand mosque in the world, Masjid Qurtuba. You know, built in 1 year, 786. You know, the most grand mosque. You know, it has arches and archways, and it's just symmetrical. It's just so outstandingly beautiful. Right now, it's a chapel. Now you can't pray anything there, but it looks like a mosque. Everything is still there as a mosque. All the inscriptions, many of them are still there, but there's also a chapel inside it. Muhammad, what's his name? What's the famous Urdu poet's name? What's his name? Muhammad Iqbal. Sorry. He went there. He prayed there in 1933. He was allowed to pray there, and he wrote a very long poem called Masjid Qurtuba. One of his lines, he says, "Didai anjame teri zameen, asmana ke sadio soteri, fazabi azan." He says, it's the only one I learned. It's just that one line because it's a very long poem. So don't look too impressed because that's all I know of the entire poem. But he says, your earth is like heaven. Your earth is like heaven. But it's a shame no one can even call adhan in you today. And so they're very strict. You can't do anything there because now it's a chapel. But it's so one thing that they built in. So when he built that masjid, they also built a thing called the maqsura. The maqsura was an enclosed space. So it's like you have the mihrab, right? You have the mihrab, and then you have a separate special place, beautiful architecture and gold everywhere. And that was a place reserved exclusively for the Khalif and the nobility to pray in. And very lavish. And they brought in, other, artists and people to work on it. Cost a lot of money. And you had demonstrations in the streets of Qurtuba protesting against it because it went against the ethics of Islam that all people are equal in the eyes of Allah. Right? And so therefore, you sense therefore this was the beginning of something is going a bit wrong. When we visited, recently I went to Al-Andalus, when you visited in Medina Zahra, right? So imagine the whole city built from scratch. And then when it was destroyed, it remained under the earth. 1910 excavations began. Imagine. A whole city under the earth for hundreds of years. 1910 excavations began. And they have now a big museum there, showing all the pots, amazing designs and everything else that they made, But one thing that you'll notice was quite sad is that the masjid is one small dingy thing right at the end of everything, like hidden away. So you're bringing in all of these diplomats to see the splendor of Islam, but the mosque is like kind of the hidden away feature, right? Not the main thing, And you think to yourself, well, it's not the best thing to do, you see. And so, after this great period of strength, this great period of wonder and science and maths and astronomy, and learning and reading and literature, all of this, soon enough the Muslims, they descended into division. What destroys us, division. They became divisive. And so all these major city centers, Seville, Cordoba, Granada, had autonomous rule. They had their own rulers. Now, who's really most happy with this? Of course, it's the Christians of Galicia and Asturias, right? It's the one who were just a few in the beginning, the Visigothic nobility. Now they've grown. Hundreds of years have passed. They've grown in power and strength. And so now they're coming down. And they're fighting against these centers, rule, Argos, Asija, all these small states and the big ones, and they're fighting some against the others. The Muslim rulers are so concerned that they stay in power, that they're enlisting the support of the Christians against the others, other Muslims living in other states. And every year they're paying an annual tribute, to stay protected and safe. That's like the beginning of the downfall, division. Allah in the Quran, He says, Subhanahu wa ta'ala, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Allah says, hold fast all of you to the rope of Allah and do not be divided. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذْ كُنْتُمْ أَعْدَاءً فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ. And remember Allah's favor upon you when you were divided. Allah brought your hearts together. وَاعْتَصِمُوا لَا تَفَرَّقُوا وَاذْكُرُوا. Allah is giving this sequence of commands, reminders about the importance of unity. Unity is like a blessing. Tafarraq, division, is a punishment. right? And they just became so divided. It's called the period of the Muluk al-Tawa'if. Muluk al-Tawa'if, the party kings period, right? So that's the beginning of the downfall for the Muslims, right? So a lot of intense division in Al-Andalus. There were efforts, alhamdulillah, by people like Yusuf ibn Tashfin from the Maghrib. In fact, the Muslims would enlist his support. This is like in the 12th century, beginning 12th century. They would enlist his support. They would invite him from the Maghrib to Al-Andalus to fight the Christians with their help. And then on 3 occasions, they would say to him, go back home now. We don't want you here with us. On the 3rd time, however, he stayed there. Yusuf ibn Tashfin, rahimahullah. And he defeated these Muluk al-Tawa'if, and he brought back a semblance of the previous unity that existed. But at the same time and that lasted for a while, until the Muslims had one very crushing defeat in the year 1212 in the Battle of Las Navas to Tolosa, and they never recovered really from that defeat. That gave the Christians the biggest, the biggest stronghold against the Muslims. And then really what followed, in the next centuries or so, is the Muslims were losing their lands. They lost Seville 1246, 1247. Even before that, James I of Aragon, in Aragon, he expels 100,000 Muslims from Aragon. 100,000 Muslims. So remember I told you before what happened to the Jews, now look at the Muslims. So Muslims are not allowed, Muslims have to wear different colored clothing to be recognized as Muslims. Muslims are charged higher taxes. Muslims are not allowed to live in the city centers, they have to live outside. You had walled compounds, Judariyas for the Jews and Mariaras for the Muslims. This is the effect. This is the effect of weakness, the effect of division, right? That you're going to be taken advantage of, manipulated because you have no power to fight against people. And so what's happening therefore? The Muslims are being expelled, from all these centers. They lose Seville, Aragon, Arcos, all these places, and they're finding their last place of refuge in Granada. Granada becomes the last place of refuge for the Muslims. And that's where the migrations went to, Granada. Before this time, before they get to their last stronghold of Granada, Muslims were forced to drink wine, forced to eat pork, okay? In some cases, forced to curse the Prophet. These things are happening, okay? Everything is forbidden now, everything's banned. Islam is prescribed, banned. No hijab, no Arabic, no salah, all that is just gone, right? Everything is gone. Mosques are becoming churches, turned into churches, okay? So nothing remains, everything is gone. All those big centers, Cordoba is now a Christian capital. They just keep our buildings, but it remains with them now. And then you get to like 1501. This is even before the Muslims get to Granada to make it their base. There was a big fire in Granada, 1501, the Great Fire of Granada, in the city center of Granada, where they burnt all the books. So all the books we're speaking about, in a grand fire, they burnt everything. All the Qur'ans, hadith, books of tafsir, books of science, except the ones that were gold and silver binded, because they could use that to make money. But they just burnt everything. And so then began the process of Muslims living in secrecy, hiding their faith, secrecy Muslims. And this is also a remarkable episode in the history of the Moriscos. The Moriscos were the Muslims who outwardly Catholics, but inwardly they were Muslims. And their history is really an amazing one, really amazing. There's a good book called Blood and Faith by Matthew Carr. He did a great job, really, in their history. There's a very good chapter called Parallel Lives, about how they did it. How did they survive as Muslims, Okay, so the pork and wine thing you understand, because if you're compelled, then that's okay, as long as you hate it in your heart. How would you make wudu? They had surveillance, they had spies watching these people they suspected to be Muslims. So when they had to have like forced baptism, they baptized themselves, but they suspected they might still be Muslims. So they watch them. What do you do? So you can't make wudu because they'll hear the splashing of the water. They might see the action of wudu. So you make tayammum. You know, you wipe your hand on the walls. And you make tayammum. Well, after a while, they'll know that what you're doing, isn't it? They know that they're not, I mean, they know about Islam because they've been living with Muslims for hundreds of years, and they know what tayammum is. And so one of the Maliki ulama, he said that what you need to do is look at the wall, look at your hand, and then rub your hand. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Look at the wall, look at your hand, rub your hand. And that's your wudu. It's ikrah. وَعِيدًا بِالضَّرْبِ وَعِيدًا بِالسَّيْفِ وَعِيدًا بِالْقَتْلِ. That's the definition of ikrah. The fear of the sword, the fear of punishment, the fear. This is they were under compulsion. This is why they have to do things. Or throw yourself in the river, go for a swim, and that's your wudu. You can't pray. How do you pray salah? You can't pray salah. They'll know, obviously, you're Muslim. Now, of course, it was easy for the Malikis, because Malikis, they can look straight, not look down. And they have their hands on their sides. Right? So it's a bit easier, isn't it? So if you're Hanafi, you can't do it. You know? See, right? So you have your hands down, you look straight. They won't know that you're praying, right? Isn't it? Yeah. And they would have, for example, they had codes in the fiqh, which is like when you pray salah, you must pray with your back to the wall, because then if anybody comes in, you'll see them before they see you. You must have the Bible next to you when you pray. You can just say, I was praying to the Bible. You can't pray in the middle of the room. You know, in Matthew Khan's book, he has an amazing thing. He has one story, a beautiful one, from the sources of a Muslim faqih. He's in Valencia. So he has, he's arranged for other Moriscos. Remember, these are people hiding their faith in secret Muslims. And so he is organized, like, you know, give them some kind of a dars or halaqa, you know, in his home. And so he brings them, he invites them. The women, they come wearing the most makeup and the most flowery clothing. Colorful, flowery clothing and the most makeup. They make all their hair and everything, yeah? And the men come in very smart because they had to look like a wedding. It had to look like a wedding. And he, the faqih, giving the dars, is holding a lute. You know? He's holding a music instrument. You know? Because he has to look like he's the performer in the wedding. Not like he's the khateeb giving the dars on Tawheed. You know what I'm saying? This is how they had to survive in that time. And our Prophet says, you know, يَأْتِي عَلَى النَّاسِ زَمَانٍ, a time will come upon the people, الصَّابِرْ عَلَى دِينِهِ, the one who's patient in his deen is like the one who's holding on to hot coal. He says, a time's going to come, people would say, Allah, Allah, and that'll be enough for them. They'll just say, Allah, Allah, that'll be enough for them. And that's how it was becoming. It was becoming like that. Everything was prohibited. Now they get to a stage where Arabic, because remember, you had a people called the, I forgot the name, what they called, they were the ones who were musta'arribeen, you know, they were the Catholics, but they learned Arabic because they fell in love with Arabic, okay? But they were Christians, but they loved Arabic culture. They loved Arabic food, Arabic dress, Arabic standards, hygiene, all this. They loved the language. So the very famous speech of a priest called Alvaro, and Alvaro says, "Oh, what a loss the world has come to. Today you can find not even one Christian who could write with the elegance of Latin, but if they're asked to write in Latin, in Arabic you'd find a multitude of them will come and write in the best proficiency of that language of Arabic. Therefore they're learning Arabic, they're reading Arabic, and many of these guys become Muslims. In fact, many of the Moriscos were from this lineage, of those who were Catholics, loved Arabic, became those Arabized ones, and then became Muslim later on. This is the process of it worked. And so they knew, therefore, how powerful Arabic was for the Muslims, and so they sought to ban Arabic for all people. The Muslims, these Moriscos, however, they're Catholics, they said no, because our kids only learn Arabic, and this is how we speak. And so they paid a large sum, 80,000 ducados, to have that ban suspended for 40 years. Right? But in that time of 40 years, they had to memorize the Lord's Prayer in Latin, the credo in Latin, they had to send their kids to Christian schools, children being baptized, all these things. I mean, they had things like, for the Muslims, how do you do? So if you send your kid to get baptized, what do you do after he comes back home after baptism? How do you wash off that water? You know, well, I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, we laugh today because we think, wow, but for them it was very hard for them. It was very hard for them. You know, I mean, you can even imagine that, right? Someone says you can't pray Salah, nothing. How do you do it? What do you do? So they had these things about, you know, at the end of the day they would pray all their prayers together because that's all they could do, you know, or pray like, you know, it's by blinking, praying, you know, small movement, and that's your Salah, you know. And this is really amazing. I mean, that just shows the vitality, strength of Islam to survive in the most difficult circumstances, and it did. And so you had this great period of the Moriscos. So 1501, all the books are banned. They all get to Granada, and when they get to Granada, one good thing was the fact they take all their skills with them, right? So all these scientists and scholars, they all go to one city called Granada, and they make it a beautiful city. And they build the Alhambra Palace, which you might have seen, I've been to already, and it's splendid, you know. And you might have noticed all around Alhambra, what's written everywhere? La ghalib illallah. Every single place. If it's here, it's going to be there. La ghalib illallah, la ghalib illallah. There's no victor except Allah, no victor except Allah. It's like a reminder, isn't it? That we're so trapped, we're just trapped. We need your help, oh Allah. La ghalib illallah, la ghalib illallah, la ghalib illallah. Everywhere in the whole of Alhambra, everywhere. Reminder. Okay? But of course, this where they got to was a consequence of some things. You know, Allah in the Quran says, you know, that ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس, because of what you have done. Interesting one. By the way, I forgot to mention the big thing. Inshallah, another time. In this whole period, the Crusades happened, isn't it? In the 12th century, the Crusades. And this is another reason why the Christians became so strong. The Crusades happened, and so they knew therefore how to make large armies. In Al-Andalus, the Pope Urban II. By the way, this. A lot of evidence that the first crusading front was Spain, not al-Quds, because Pope Urban II, the same Catholic Pope who gave the license for Christians to go and fight the Muslims in Al-Andalus, or in al-Quds, before, this is 1188 or 1189, he promised the same remission, forgiveness of sins for the Christians who went to defend the Church of Zaragoza in Spain, and if they did, they'd be forgiven. That's the same thing he told the Christians who went to fight the Muslims in Al-Quds. And also, he said to the Christians of Spain, don't come and fight in Jerusalem, stay there and fight the Muslims of Spain. So therefore, the crusading happened on different fronts, but very much also in Spain, as well as in Al-Quds. And so, you know, they couldn't survive very long. You know, at the end, they made terms, you know, with the Christians who came with their armies and fought the Muslims or expelled the Muslims from Granada, and that was really the end of the Muslim existence in Al-Andalus. I've skipped over many things, obviously, because you can't cover hundreds and hundreds of years in one time like that. But that's kind of just a glimpse of some of the things that happened to the Muslims of that land. Today in Al-Andalus, there are about 100,000 converts to Islam in Spain. And there is really a lot of interest now about the history of Muslims in that land and the significance of Islam in Al-Andalus, in Spain. It intrigued a lot of Spaniards because, you know, that means from their forefathers, they would have been Muslims. You know. And they left behind something of their culture, you know. And it's interesting, when you see the Spaniards, you kind of sense there's something about them. And so, Allah in the Quran says, تِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. These are days we alter among the people. There was a very famous poet, scholar called Al-Rundi, wrote a poem at the fall of Seville. In this poem he said, لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ إِذَا مَا تَمَّ نُقْصَانٍ فلا يغر بطيب العيش إنسان وهذه الدار لا تبقي على أحد ولا يدوم على أحد لها شأن. He says everything, nothing reaches its perfection, right? Everything has a fault, has a defect. Nothing will last forever. Everything will come down. And these lands, he says, were not supposed to last forever. وأين ملوك ذوي التيجان من يمن أين منهم أكالين وتيجان وأين ما حازوا قارون من ذهب وأين عاد وشداد وقحطان. Where is Qarun that Allah mentions in the Quran? Where is all of his gold today? Where is Ad and Thamud, these great, terrible, tyrannical civilizations? Where are they today? وأين قرطبة دار العلوم وكم من عالم قد سما فيها لها شأن. How many scholars passed through Qurtuba once upon a time? Where is it today? And he says أتى على الكل أمر لا مرد له حتى قضوا فكأن القوم ما كانوا. الله أكبر. He says, for all of them came something that they could not return from until they passed, and it's as if they didn't exist there in the first place. Meaning death came to every single one of them. Just like for us. And then we will pass as if we weren't even there in the first place. Just like Medina Zahra. The whole city, amazing whole city, all splendor architecture in the earth, gone. As if it didn't exist in the first place. And this was a reminder, therefore, not to lament, not to feel defeated. No, this is what happened for us to learn lessons from. Spain really is the only place in the world where I think Islam was established in full and removed in full. Established in full. Khilafah, Khalif, civilization, all of this learning, scholars, and then removed in full. And so, a lot of lessons for us to learn, about this place. Great for us to reflect upon the great innovation of the Muslims in building, in technology, in art, in mathematics, science, and how they worked also with the Christians and the Jews, and the convivencia building program, the coexistence, how they worked together. It was really beautiful. And so, yeah, thank you so much for coming. Jazakumullah khairan. Allah bless you. Jazakumullah khairan. And may Allah forgive and have mercy upon all of us. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakumullah khair, Ustadh. We're just going to take about 5-10 minutes for question and answers, inshallah. So if anyone has any questions for Ustadh, please ask away, inshallah.
The city of Medina Zahra you mentioned, what's the modern day name for it?
It is same name. Yeah. So what it is, it's in Qurtuba, outside a little bit. Now there's a very big museum. They've put a lot of money into it, and you can go in and see Medina Zahra. You can see the buildings that they've excavated. You can see the walls. You can see the arrangement of it, in the museum you see a much bigger thing. You see like a scaling of the city, the thing that they've unearthed, the pots, the pans, the silverware, all of that is in the museum, or much of it is in the museum, and it's really impressive, really impressive.
The Spanish government, or the Spanish people, are they making efforts to reconnect with the history?
Yeah. So I was told, in fact, it began in the 1960s when there's a new leader that they had in Spain, and he wanted to. I mean, the way that they see it is, this is part of Spain's history.
So tourism.
Really. Yeah, tourism. That's it, right? So part of Spain's history. So many empires existed. The Visigoths, and then you had the Muslims, and you had, so kind of they slide it in there, but. You should really visit. Those of you who haven't visited, you should really go there. In Qurtuba, they have another amazing museum, and they put so much money into it. They have really, really beautiful museum, and they show what Muslims did in civilization in that land. Seville, you have the Al-Khazar, amazing. Al-Khazar is really beautiful. So I'll give you an example. Al-Khazar is Al-Qasr. It's served as a fortress castle. So outwardly it's very bland, okay. very plain looking, and you think, oh, what could be in there? And it's just very simple, you know. And then you go inside, and so the tour guide inside there, she's a Spaniard woman, she said to us, you see, the Al-Khazar is like the Muslim. Like the Muslim. And so she said, you know, you don't look at the outside. You look at the inside, in the heart of the Muslim. Oh, this is amazing. You have like a class on tazkiyatun nafs, you know. So she said, you look at the inside. It's the heart of a Muslim, you know. At-taqwa hahuna, the hadith. And so it was beautiful. Okay, so she said, she said, what you're going to see is that the outside you can see is very bland. Now, the more in you go, the more beautiful it's going to become. She said, that's the Muslim. Wow. And so you go in. Okay, first courtyard. Wow, you start seeing some architecture. Architecture, calligraphy, design. Okay, this is quite good, not bad, you know. That's not bad. Okay, then you go in again. Then you start seeing more. And now it's looking really, really good. Okay, the artwork, the you know, the woodwork, all this stuff. You start seeing the designs, the calligraphy, everything. And then you go in more. And then you come to the middle part. The middle part is the middle courtyard, and that's like designed like to be like heaven. Okay, so you have orange trees. Each orange tree is 1 meter high. You have streams, and you have trees, and it looks, and flowers, and it looks so beautiful. And she said, you see what the Muslims wanted to do? She said, so she asked, she said, why are these orange trees 1 meter high? I said, I don't know. We had Mufti Abdul Wahab also in our group, yeah. So we were asking her, what is it? And she said, you see, it was to give the learning, the teaching, that these trees are 1 meter high to show that heaven is within reach. Jannah is within reach, you know. And so there's lots of orange trees. She said, why? She said, because they wanted to give the impression that in heaven everything is in abundance. Lots of fruit in heaven, you know. And you think, wow. But again, the question is it becoming an excess? Is the elegance becoming into an excess? You know, because of course heaven you have to work for it. Yeah? Anyways, a reminder. So that was, I mean the other thing. So just opposite Al-Khazar, you have the great church of Seville, which used to be the great mosque of Seville. Only one tall minaret survives. That was the tallest minaret in the world at that time. 150 meters high, tallest minaret in the world. So you see a lot of these things and you think, wow. Then you connect and you think, well, this is how it all happened, you know. So, yeah, a lot to learn from.
Is there any other questions, others?
Yes, Islam Sheikh. Alhamdulillah, it's excellent talk. Always a pleasure to hear about the beautiful history of Islam. You mentioned a couple of books, which was one of them was Blood and Faith.
Blood and Faith, Matthew Carr.
Blood and Faith.
Yeah,
is there any other sort of books you can recommend with regards to
there's good books. Okay.
Could give it a good depiction of Islam as opposed to a bias of an author or something?
Yeah, so generally, you know, books on Al-Andalus, there's a good book called Lost Islamic History. It has a chapter on Al-Andalus by a Muslim author, I can't remember his name. Yeah, I can't remember his name, but that's what the title, Lost Islamic History. That has a chapter on Al-Andalus. You have Islam in Andalus, very old, famous one, Ahmad Thompson, Islam in Andalus. You have What Islam Did for Us by a non-Muslim author, but quite sympathetic to Muslim achievement in Al-Andalus and elsewhere, what Islam did for us. And then Matthew Carr's Blood and Faith, that's a very good book, you know. But I don't think that covers the beginning part. I think it's more towards the Inquisition part. You have others that are critical. You know, it's one I have called Spanish Inquisition by a non-Muslim author, but I forgot the author's name. But he's quite critical. You know.
So what about the beginning part then? Is there any sort of...
yeah, okay, so you have the Moors, yeah, by Stanley Lane Poole. It's called the Moors, yeah, M-O-R-S. It might be a subheading as well, but that's the author, Stanley Lane Poole. And that has that's very sympathetic towards Muslim history. The beginning part, it has the whole story of, like I mentioned, of Al-Rahman the first, Tariq bin Ziyad, Muslim Nusayr. That's a good book. And there's others as well, but I can't remember them, you know. Yeah.
We've got one brother there.
At the peak of Islam, what was the population made up of between Muslim, Christian and Jew? Was it majority Muslim?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, because the native population, of course, was Christian when the Muslims first arrived. Let's say by the 12th century, you had about 4.6 million living in Spain. Okay, by the 1100s. So now people are, of course, converting to Islam, embracing Islam, but I wouldn't think that the Muslims are the majority in that country, you know. Until maybe towards the end time, we had a lot of mass conversions. Yet I think conversions were mostly around the 12th century, you know. But I don't think there was a keeping of a record of the amount of Muslims in ratio to those who were non-Muslims.
Yeah. Would it be fair to say that it's quite unique in the sense that it's one of the lands that was ruled by Islam, by Muslims, yet the majority were non-Muslim?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one thing Muslims did is that they did not, you know, antagonize the natives, and they would even appoint them as governors, non-Muslim governors, you know, over Muslim land. They also did that. As governors, in some cases as participants in their armies, you know. And so this really was part of the whole element of convivencia, right? So some historians would be critical of that because it's giving too much room. For example, 1118, the Christians took Toledo from the Muslims, okay? Defeat Toledo. And so the Christians who were initially allied with the Muslims turned against them, right? Turned against them, because when the Christians took power, they decided with the Christians, right? It's like you just go with the victor. That's how it happened, you know. So, you know, in hindsight, historians would say those would be mistakes because they brought them too close to themselves. But I guess they just judged it based upon the, you know, situation of the time. So, yeah.
Sorry, there's a narration about when they went into Spain initially, the commander, he burned the boats. Is that authentic narration or?
As far as I know, it's not authentic.
It's not authentic.
As far as I know, it's not authentic. Okay. And even, I mean, some scholars, they say it doesn't make too much sense, actually. Maybe it's haram to you're burning your own boats, you know. You know, so as far as I know, it doesn't have credibility, that story, you know.
Yeah, we'll get one last question after.
Yeah, in regards back to the history of it, would you say, I don't know too much about this, but would you say that some of the contributing factors to the demise or to the downfall of the Muslim stronghold was because of some of the stuff they practiced, some of the stuff that they done, or you touched on it just before now, but maybe they got too close, or some historians will say that they let them too much in, and some of the, I'm not too familiar with some of the ulama, as in the term of scientists back then, but for example, like Ibn Sina, I'm aware of that some of the ulama say that he was like he started talking about that, about quite crazy stuff about the creation is not this and not that, and obviously we know that obviously that's not a good look, but would you say that's a contributing factor? I know that Ibn Taymiyyah talks about Ibn Sina, and I think some of the contemporary scholars.
Yeah, but I think it's not limited to Al-Andalus. You know, you had As-Suhrawardi in Damascus, executed by Salah ad-Din, you know, you had Ibn Arabi. So you had people who are, maybe people put question marks around them, not confined to Al-Andalus, other parts. At Baghdad, you had a similar thing. I think, because my specialty, in fact, is a Crusades, not on Al-Andalus. But one thing I'll tell you about Crusades is that when the Christians took Bayt al-Maqdis, the Muslims, the first responses were inner blame. they weren't even so much about attacking the Crusaders. That came later. You don't even, in fact, see in the initial responses kind of, a feeling of loss for Al-Aqsa. It was inner blame. وكيف تنام العين ملء جفونها لهفوات أيقظ كل نائم وإخوانكم بالشام يضحي مقيلهم وغور المذاكب كنت شام. Meaning, they're attacking the apathy of the Muslims, they're attacking indifference of the Muslims, they're attacking their love for the dunya for the Muslims, they're attacking the division, rivalries. So Al-Aqsa is being besieged, and you have the two sons of the Seljuk Wazir, right? Muhammad and another one, fighting against one another during the siege of Jerusalem. So I think, and this is why, so Imam Ghazali's Wasfin of Ihya Ulumuddin and the work of Nizam al-Mulk were just part of that whole process, meaning you need to fix yourself up because you're in a mess. And that rejuvenated what you call the new Seljuk, the new Sunnism of the Seljuk period. And then it went through. So Nuruddin, for example, was an example of that. He built like so many madrasas teaching this, ilm al-suluk. We also had Fada'il al-Quds, studies the virtues of Jerusalem. It was a new part of the curriculum. So it's hard, therefore, to know, because we're only we're non-actors, in the scene. We're just way after the event, and we just look back. And then it depends which history you're going to read, because if you're going to read Ibn al-Athir, different to reading Abu Shama. If you read Abu Shama, different to Ibn Shaddad, different to Al-Asfahani. So each historian has his own take on the events that he's describing. And some they attribute blame to some things, others don't. So I think in Al-Andalus, what I've seen that people emphasize on, scholars, is excess, greed, and division. You had, of course, you had a great range of scholars. That time, you won't find agreement with everyone on every core point anyway. It's just abadan. It's not going to happen. You won't have it. Okay. But in that time, it's like, for example, look between the madhahib. 10th century Baghdad, you used to have brawls, outside Baghdad. Hanafis fighting Shafis. These are like major punch-ups between the Hanafis and the Shafis. You used to have Nizam al-Mulki kind of settled things down, soothed it down, But you have these, in Islamic history, you have a lot of these things all over the place, But this is not representative of the whole, the whole, it's not like this. But I think in that time, division was one of the biggest factors that led to the downfall. And Allah in the Quran gives us these things. وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا, Allah says, don't dispute amongst yourselves, because you're going to feel like you've lost and your courage is going to depart after Uhud. And so, if you're seeing this again and again, the Christians would just take power over you, and they did that. So I think it's contributing factors. And Allah knows best, of course.
Yeah. Time for just last question.
Okay.
No, I just wanted to ask about, is it Tariq al-Ahmar? I don't know whether you came across the name. He was one of the army generals also in Spain, Islamic Andalus, and he did align with some Christians, and then they turned against him, and I think he went to the mother to ask for forgiveness, and the mother refused to.
No, I think you mean Abu Abdullah.
Is it Abu Abdullah?
Abu Abdullah, yeah. Okay, this is at the end. This is the end of Granada. So again, so here's a good point. This is about who's telling the history, the story, because you have those who would say Abu Abdullah, was being pragmatic because they'd lost everything anyway. They'd lost everything. Qurtuba, civil, they lost, and all they had was a small place of Granada, and now they're going to lose it. They're about to lose it. And so Abu Abdullah, he has a son, and his son goes against the father and against the uncle, and he says, we're going to fight until the death. We're going to resist until it's all over. That's his, and they did it. They did that. And Abdullah says we have to make terms. Make terms with them, at least we get a good outcome for the remaining one of us, or ones of us, okay? And so he sought terms. And so Ferdinand and Isabella, okay, these other things I could have mentioned, but this time. So they come in with the flags of the Compostela, Santiago de Compostela. So in the 900s, 990s, there's a man called Ibn Abi Amir al-Mansur. He was the Hajib, he was like the Chamberlain. He was the Chamberlain, and he used to make all these raids against the Christians of the North. Oh, every year, like a lot of raids, okay? But once he attacked a place called the Santiago de Compostela. Now, that's a place in Al-Andalus, the Christians believe it has the remains of Saint James. James, who they believe in the Bible is Jesus' brother, the Lord's brother, okay? They believe his remains are there, okay? So what does he do? He goes there, he destroys it, he takes the bells of the church, puts them on the back of donkeys, takes them to Masjid Qurtaba, and uses them for the lamps. This is the way he does it. Okay. Now this enrages the Christians, infuriates them, right? Now, so what it does is it inspires a pilgrimage movement to the Compostela until today. Go on YouTube. Until today, Christians make pilgrimage all the way there because of this single event. Now what happened is that when the Christians took Al-Andalus, they came in with the flags of Compostela, Santiago, to remind themselves. This is like the Shah, this is like the slogan, right? In memory of what they did then, we're coming back with those same flags, right? They took the bells from the lamps of the mosque, put them on donkeys, and took them back to the church. Right, to put them back on their bell, their church tower. They did. So can you see how important symbolism is? If you make the wrong move, it can be used against you. Symbolically. That's how it did it, symbolically. And so now when he left, there's a place in Al-Andalus. It's on a road. It's called the Moor's Last Sigh. It's like a placard thing, right? Like you have you have on roads. Called the Moor's Last Sigh, meaning that was where they looked back. He looked back, and he began to weep because he thought, well, that's it. I mean, you had Granada, okay, you lasted for a while, it was with you. You look back, and now it's gone. Began to weep, and so his mother was with him, and his mother, she said to him, "Tabki, kan nisa." He said, you weep like a woman for a land you could not defend like a man. You weep like a woman for a land you could not defend like a man, And it's very sad, it's a very popular quote that she said to him. مُلْكًا لَمْ تُدَافِعَ عَنُكَ الرِّجَالِ You tabki كَالنِّسَاء مُلْكًا لَمْ تُدَافِعَ You cry like a woman for a land you could not defend like a man, So you have two sides here. There will be those who exonerate Abu Abdullah because they will say he was pragmatic, he just saw a best end because it was all over anyway. And then he will say those critical of him because they were saying like he just allied with the Christians to get few, to save his life and live his people and live in a good land before he dies, until he dies, because it was all going to be over anyway. And Allah knows best, we just look in hindsight after hundreds of years, so Allah knows best,
Okay then. Jazakumullah khair, Ustad. We'll wrap it up there, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair to everyone.